This is the 10-Minute Teacher Podcast, episode 669. What will school be like in the fall after a COVID-19 spring? Welcome to the 10-Minute Teacher Podcast, hosted by author, educator, speaker, and mom, the Cool Cat teacher, Varkey Davis. Varkey's guest today is award-winning educator Joseph Fatheree, who is known for his creative and futuristic methods of teaching. His students have become groundbreaking innovators, inventors, programmers, and musicians. But today, in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis, the future is looking very different, especially in the field of education. Let's hear what Joseph and Varkey have to say about it now. Enjoy!
Today, I want to recommend my friend Casey Bell's Google Classroom Masterclass. Become a better distance education teacher and get half off this amazing class. I'll tell you how at the end of the show. So today we're talking with one of the top teachers in the world, top 10 Global Teacher Prize, also has won Illinois Teacher of the Year, and Joseph Fatheree has a lot of experience in global education as well as at his school. So Joseph, today we wanted to talk a little bit about what do we think school is going to look like in the fall. And of course, as we're recording this in May, we know that it's conjecture, but you're in a lot of think tanks and talk to a lot of folks. What's it shaping up to look like?
I think the one thing that I know what school is going to look like when we go back, we're going to have an army of outstanding teacher leaders and administrators across the country that are doing everything in their power to provide a quality education for our kids. I've just been blown away, Varkey, by the response that teachers around the world have put out and the efforts they're going to for our kids. So that I know for sure we're going to have that. And I know we're going to have parents that are committed to moving their children on and making sure they're successful. And I know we're going to have, as teachers, we're going to have a brilliant group of young adults to work with. So those are all the positives that I'm focused on. The water gets a little muddier after that, but I would be shocked if at some point in time, if we do start on time, which I hope we do, I hope that we get a chance to start back with our kids and get to meet one another and really build that culture. But I wouldn't be shocked to see us have periodic interruptions throughout the course of next year as caseloads start to spike in different areas around the country. But I do hope that what we've learned even in these last couple of months has prepared us in a way that we've never thought possible before.
But you know, the digital divide has just gotten extremely detrimental. I mean, it's always been there. People have always said it's a civil rights issue. But now, you know, I've seen some things that said we're not going to have great education again until every kid has a technology device and internet access at home. What do we do about that?
You're exactly right. The digital divide is a travesty, and we're seeing it for what it is. We've ripped the bandage off, and we're seeing inequity across the board. And whether it's in large urban centers or in small rural communities around the country, you know, it's very difficult for these kids to be on the same page if they don't have the access. And it's been hidden for years because you could try to provide access at school, even though some schools didn't have it. It was magnified at home when parents just didn't have the resources to provide for their kids. So I do think there's going to be a universal call for universal access for internet and for all students across the country. And I really do believe that people are going to come together and push this, and we'll see it in the next few years, but it's not going to happen overnight. So the question is, what do we do in the short term? And that's what every teacher and administrator needs to be thinking about. What do we do in the short term to make sure those kids don't fall farther behind, so they don't lose confidence in who they are? So it's just not another stamp of this is exactly who everybody thought I was. You know, we don't want that for those kids. So I'm hoping that if anything's happened, it's really identified this and it's made it, you know, very obvious that there's an issue. But I think it's going to be a step process to get through this. I think people are going to be willing to make it happen, but it's not going to happen overnight. So the question is then, what can we do, not only as teachers and administrators, but community members? What do you have to offer to help these kids out? Parents being willing to come and share that here are my issues so that we can come together as a collective family. I wish I had a really good answer on this, but it's one that's been a problem for a long time, but one that I believe that we're going to get an answer to, hopefully in the short term.
Well, here's the other struggle is I was reading some guidelines on a white paper that some recommendations are that if you have one case on your campus, that you're going to have to close your school for 2 to 5 days. That's expensive to have one case. So, of course, a lot of people are going to be screening for fever before the child gets out of the car, screening before they get on the bus, all that sort of thing. But we're going to have to shift. We've always said, we want your kid at school. We want your kid at school. We want your kid at school. Well, now we're going to say, well, if somebody in your house has it, we want them at home. How are we going to provide our classes in that environment? Is everything going to have to be hybrid?
Well, I think it's going to have to be. I understand that we want testing and we want tracking, but trying to manage that with, 350 million plus people, trying to just handle that across the country and then doing it at schools and having people not prepared for it, it is not going to be a system without failure. There are just going to be issues that come up. And so I think the big thing that I want everybody to think about is how do we practice grace and how we grow from this? But I think there are going to have to be a lot of hybrid systems set up. And I think right now, whether we like the way the system was or not, everybody knew how to do school. And now we don't. And so what I'm hoping is we're going to get a bunch of bright, creative minds together that bring all stakeholders together finally and say, what does this look like in your local community? And that we're transparent about it. And, unlike when we were going through all of the years of testing where failure came out, and we judged our schools off of the success of standardized tests, that we embrace failure and say, this didn't work, but these 3 things did. And we can start to share that in kind of an open source way. I think that's the way it's going to have to be. But if lawmakers and other people think, we've got to have this perfect system, it's going to be a long time, I think, before we're able to get back to school because that system doesn't exist. And it's a fallacy if people think that it does.
Yeah. And, what do we do about the over 1/4 of teachers are over the age of 55? Larry Ferlazzo wrote a great piece on, I'm in my 60s. Am I going to be stuck at home even though I want to go to school? And he runs half marathons or something. But because of his age, his health insurance may tell him he has to stay home. I mean, is that really where we're heading?
Well, it may be. And, I hope that administrators and policymakers do say that the health of our staff and our students come first. If we can come to agreement on that, then I think we can figure out ways to work around it. And so what does that look like? Does it mean that, if you're over 55, that you work remotely sometimes, that you set up buildings differently, that we do social distancing, that we have classes on different number of days where you have only X number of kids there? I really think it's a blank canvas. And that's where I think the transparency comes in. What is working in your school and how do we share that? And how do we know that it's working? And likewise, I really hope policymakers understand the last place we can afford to cut the budget at right now is schools. We've been asked to flip everything upside down, and our teachers and administrators are working nonstop to make sure our kids don't miss a beat. And we just can't have that interruption in the funding piece. And what I hope doesn't happen too, Vicki, and this is a concern of mine once school gets rolling again, is that we don't say, oh my gosh, kids have been out of school for 2 months or 6 months. Let's go back and roll that testing machine back up. Let's get it cranked back up and take as many tests as we can to see how far our kids are behind. I'm not saying we shouldn't find out where they're at, but maybe there's a better use for that funding. Maybe there's a better use for that sweat equity and that manpower where we can come together and say, all right, let's figure out where we need to go. But, our history shows that's what we do. And so I don't think we're going to put the cat back in the box. I think that people, out of all the bad things that's happened about COVID, we've been forced to reimagine what school looks like. We've been forced to think about what assessment looks like. How do we teach? How do you connect the curriculum to the real world? How do you engage kids? Was the way I teaching before, did it need to change? I mean, all of these are really beautiful things that as educators we're being asked to look at, and we're giving the time to look at it. We have to look at it and understand the system was never perfect. It's not going to be perfect in the next few months. But if we work together, I think we can make it a lot better for all of our learners so that we can kind of look back and say, that equity issue, we did address it. And now look 5 years, 10 years down the road where our kids are at least that's hopeful that's the direction we're heading.
The thing I worry about most is there are a lot of schools who threw up their hands and threw in the towel. When all this started, I joined a Facebook group to kind of track what was going on. And, I said, what mistakes did you make? And, there were like several hundred that responded. And one person from China said, well, we kind of did it halfway, so they cut our pay in half. Another school in China said, well, we said we couldn't do it, so they're not paying us right now. And then other schools said, yeah, we made it work, and we've got kids all over the world that are still in school and teachers all over the world that are still in schools too. And I just realized how serious it was of what we do. I was talking to somebody the other day, and he had told his superintendent, you have created a school culture, whether you realize it or not. That may have been you. Did you say that?
That was me.
Can I quote that? Do I need to take that out?
Well, no. I'm glad that you remember that, because that's my thing. Is I've been talking to people about, you really need to sit down with all of your key stakeholders and start visionarying where you want school to go. And I think you do need to do in the short term. So what do you need to do over the summer to get prepped for the fall? What does next first semester look like? What does the first year look like? And even 2 to 3 years out, and start forecasting and prepping for that. But, in the terms of culture, the way we started, and I understand, like my school, we found out on Friday that school was going to shut down on Monday, and it wasn't a lot of time to get ready. And so there was this shock and awe. How do I recover? But, our district got around pretty quick and stood on its feet, and we're working on things. But there's been a culture created in the short term. And I hear at the high school level around the country that, just trying to keep kids engaged. What does that look like? So we've got to start thinking, what does that culture look like? And I tell people in a traditional school setting, I don't think we think about that a whole lot. I think that you inherit the culture that came before you, and then you put your spin on it. And so it's one metamorphosis after another, but there's really not a lot of purposeful planning on how do we address culture. And that's something that I think is really, really important. And in an area that I'd like to talk to you a little bit about, what does discipline look like online? Some schools are, they spend a lot of time shaping a positive discipline culture in their school setting. But what does a positive discipline culture look like in a remote setting? And I haven't heard a lot of people talking about that. And what do you do? How do you call that? If somebody's acting up and doing things, how do you address those things? That's just one example of many that schools are going to be asked to deal with in the coming months.
Well, we actually had a lead person that handled all those issues and kind of shifted how we handled that. I mean, it is something you have to proactively address and say, okay, this is how we're going to handle it. And I think your point that's really had me thinking since you and I talked not too long ago about this topic is that we have truly changed our school cultures. We really have. And we're going to inherit the culture in the fall that we've created during this distance learning experience. And some people have learned at a distance, and some people it's virtual learning because they're like pretending to learn and they haven't really. And you can call it learning, but if learning is not happening, it's just distance pretending or something. I don't know what it is.
One of the other areas that we've talked about, culture setting, the equity gap, the health and welfare of student and staff. When we think about COVID right now, most people are thinking about the physical health of students and staff, but there's this whole big elephant in the room about the social emotional and the mental health. We have a lot of people who have been indoors for a long, long time. I spent the last 2 days filming our valedictorians for graduation speeches. And one of the students was talking to him, and he said, I haven't been out of the house practically at all in 45 days. And if you are there and it's your family and you don't have all that time together and you don't have ways to connect outside and you haven't had interventions, well, what's that going to look like? What's it like for an 8-year-old? What's it like for a teacher who's stressed out about all these new roles and responsibilities that they have? And they have family at home that they're dealing with, or, maybe aging parents. And so that's something else I really think districts need to take a very strong look at is first, how are you providing for the needs of your staff on the front line, both physical and the social, emotional, mental health side? And then what are you doing for the students on that? And schools are tremendously understaffed anyway in the terms of counselors and things like that. And so what outside resources can we get to make sure that gets addressed? Because the damage and effect that those issues have if they're not tended to, both on the student and staff side. And so we just want to make sure that our students and staff are really, really healthy, including our administrators.
Well, trauma-informed teaching is important, but everybody's going through this trauma together in phobias and fears and emotional disability, everything from Are we going to permanently have people who are agoraphobics and germophobics and perhaps justified in those ways? We hadn't even talked about masks and all these other things. I think that these are conversations a lot of folks are having. I'm not sure people really know what it looks like, except that it looks different, except that we'll have to be prepared to perhaps go online quickly, that blending is probably a permanent part of what we're doing, and internet access is a permanent part, as well as this whole social emotional learning piece. So thanks for pontificating and having this conversation with me, Joseph, and maybe we'll pick back up in the fall and see where we were right and where we were way off.
Mm-hmm. And I guess the last thing I would have to say to your audience is don't lose hope. Listening to our young adults, our seniors, the last couple of days, I have been so impressed with their attitudes and how they are going to become the next greatest generation. And we've got to maintain that hope as well. So I'm excited to work with people like you and your audience, and we're going to do this. So let's just do it together.
Okay. Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you.
My friend Casey Bell writes the Shake Up Learning blog. Casey is who I turn to when I need to train my teachers on Google Classroom and the Level 1 Google Classroom Teacher Certification Training. Right now, Casey is offering her Google Classroom Masterclass at half off. That's a great deal, especially now, if you're in the middle of distance learning or upping your Google Classroom ability. So go to googleclassroomcourse.com and use the coupon code HOMELEARNING to get 50% off and take advantage of that great price. So sign up now for Casey's Google Classroom Masterclass. If you need training for your entire school like I did, check out gsuitetrainingforschools.com. Tell her Vicki Davis, the Cool Cat Teacher, sent you. Casey rocks, and I think she'll help you become a better distance learning teacher now. Thanks for sponsoring the show, Casey.